financed by the Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs and managed by RVO. Land administration is a powerful tool for equitable development, but its success depends on how it's being implemented. We are here today to discuss how a people-centered approach can transform fit-for-purpose land administration and ensure it truly serves the needs of communities. By prioritizing the voices of local people, especially women, youth, and marginalized groups, we can create land administration systems that are not only efficient, but also just and inclusive. We also delve into the importance of access to land data and information. By empowering communities with data, we can foster transparency, accountability, and informed decision-making. This webinar will explore how to design land administration systems that generate and disseminate data in ways that are meaningful and accessible to all. So, I'm excited to hear from our panelists as they will share their insights and experience on this critical topic. But before I will introduce them to you, there are a few additional logistical notes before we begin. So this webinar is being streamed live on multiple platforms. Please note that live tweeting and promotion on LinkedIn is happening for this event from the Land Portal accounts, and the hashtag we are using is hashtag #LandAtScale. We have created a social media kit for this event, which has been shared with you in the chat. If you have questions, please post them using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, and we will try to answer them later on in the webinar. Finally, in the interest of transparency, I should add that today's session is being recorded, and you will receive the link to the video afterwards. Also, an article with the key messages will be available later in Land Portal's website. Now, the last reminder for our speakers. As we have translation, please, I would like to remind you to speak slowly. Now, I'm very happy to introduce to you our panel of today. So first we have Niso Kaukamla, and he is the #LandAtScale project coordinator for Oxfam in Chad. Niso is an expert in natural resource crisis and conflict management, and he's also a quality and accountability specialist. Then we have Royal Mabakeng, and she's a lecturer in land administration at Namibia University of Science and Technology. She's pursuing a PhD in spatial sciences. Her research focuses on land tenure and water access in informal settlements. Then we have Maria Clara van der Hammen. She is the #LandAtScale project coordinator for Tropenbos, Colombia. She's an anthropologist with a PhD in cultural anthropology from the University of Utrecht, with experience in participatory research with indigenous, peasant, and Black communities. Last but not least, we have Charlton Beyer, who I will call Tommy, and he is the Senior Land Information Specialist for the Land Portal. He's a specialist in land governance and administration with a background in land surveying and information system design. And as you will see, he is an open data advocate. So I will start now with the first round. So please, let me give the floor to Royal to give us a 5-minute overview of what fit-for-purpose land administration is. What are we talking about, Royal?
All right, thank you, MK. Just to start off, so when we think about a fit-for-purpose land administration, it's a top-down land administration approach that focuses on creating partnerships firstly, developing capacity of land institutions to improve land tenure at scale. I'll just quickly go into a general background in terms of how it came about. The approach emerged out of a gradual development of land administration as a field of practice. Generally, land administration was fixed in cadastral and land registration systems, which were mostly developed for providing information about types of land use, land value, and land ownership. So the design was based on the cultures and judicial systems across the world. So decades ago, what happened is that they emerged a new term where we defined now land administration as a process of determining, recording, and disseminating information about ownership, value, and use of land when implementing land management policies. So here you see again that the focus was still on information. So this was followed up by a change in requirements in the types of information or data that is collected on land. and this established land administration as a system. So when we talk about land administration as a system, it looks at the creation of enabling infrastructure for implementing land policies and land management strategies in promoting sustainable development. And this is what we mostly also focus on within our land administration teaching at the university. And I believe many of the land institutions do also look at land administration systems as an enabling infrastructure. So what we see over time, developed countries improved their land institutions to enable the protection of land tenure and the relationships that people have to land. But what we have noticed is that this improvement in maturity of land institutions did not happen across the world. We see that some countries still had weak land governance and high levels of tenure insecurity. So with the advancements of technology and also the drive towards achieving sustainable development, they emerged the development of what we call land tools. So these land tools have been spearheaded by the Global Land Tool Network, which the Namibia University of Science and Technology is a partner, and I believe Land Portal as well, where, for example, some of the tools that were developed is the social tenure domain model, which is both a theory and a concept that looks at recognizing the social tenure relationships that people have to land, and then also a software application that supports low income or local authorities that don't have any other types of technology to capture and record land rights. And then there is also the continuum of land rights, which has been piloted across different contexts. So now here we come to the development of the fit for purpose land administration, which is that this top-down approach. Firstly, it focuses on three fundamental frameworks, where you have the spatial framework that focuses on the use of aerial imagery. You have participatory field adjudication, and then you have the incremental improvement of accuracy when you are collecting your spatial information. And that is now supported or should be supported by an institutional framework that should be holistic, transparent, and should also be cost effective. And there should be continuous capacity development for the institutions that are implementing the land administration processes. And then lastly, there should be a legal framework established where fit for purpose land administration is enshrined in law, promoting the security of land rights for all, recognition of human rights, and then also gender equality. So just lastly, before I finish, I'd emphasize that the fit for purpose land administration approach has 7 characteristics. So if you're implementing a fit for purpose land administration and you are missing some of these characteristics, there will be some questions whether your approach is fit for purpose or not. And these 7 are, firstly, the approach should be flexible, where your spatial data capturing should have some flexible approaches in it. The approach should be inclusive, where you ensure that you cater to all types of tenure, where you don't just sort of focus on your freehold, or you say you're only going to focus on your customary. It should recognize all types of tenure, including informal as well. It should be inclusive. As I mentioned, it should be participatory, and it should be affordable. I'll emphasize affordability here because sometimes you develop a system and then it ends up being too expensive or unaffordable. It should be affordable for the government institution to implement, and then also for the society to use at the end. And then it should be reliable. It should be attainable, meaning that when you are implementing your fit for purpose land administration, it shouldn't be an end in all. You should look at improving your accuracy and your standards over time. And I just want to emphasize something that Prof. Enemark, one of the proponents of fit for purpose land administration, he emphasizes the saying all the time, which is when you are implementing a fit for purpose land administration process, you should ensure that you do as little as possible and as much as necessary to ensure tenure security for all. MK, that's all I had to cover in terms of the context. Thank you.
Thank you, Royal. I see that many people have joined the chat, and I saw one name out there as well from Stig Endema. He's one of the founders of Fit for Purpose. So welcome to all of you. And we are very keen to also know what your feedback is after the session. But thank you, Royal, for this excellent overview. So Fit for Purpose land administration is developed to address the immediate needs of a population for land rights security, and it should allow room for further development. Let me now bring in Maria Clara. Maria, how can we ensure that Fit for Purpose land administration also truly serves the needs of and priorities of local communities? Over to you.
Okay, thank you, Imke, and thank you, Royal, for your very excellent introduction to this whole issue. Well, I'm talking from Colombia, and in Colombia, land and all the issues about land are the fuel, are the reason, are the our very long lasting conflict in the country. We have very complicated situations where and a very weak land administration system. So a fit-for-purpose land administration system is very, very useful in this context. And we have been working with indigenous and Afro-Colombian communities. And what we have seen is that it's very important to start a very participatory process. So it's very important in this process that people receive all the information about land administration, about what kind of data are proposed to collect, what is this all about, what are we going to what are we talking about, and what could be of benefit for them. So this capacity building, this information exchange of information, and trying to deal with this has been very important. For instance, we have been working with the Arawakan people of the Sierra Nevada, and they have been buying informally a lot of pieces of land that they want to convert into collective property title, which is a possibility for indigenous communities in Colombia. But then this information about the status of these pieces of land is very bad. They don't have access to it. We have been trying to work together with them to get clearness, insight in this situation. So accompanying them also in this process of interacting with state institutions has been also important. So, well, these are some first ideas about what is needed. So this capacity building, and then trying to understand also really what people want and what data are important for. If you allow me just half a minute, I think it was very interesting to see that for them, land governance and land administration is not only something about commodities or about economic issues, but it has also a very important spiritual dimension. And for them to have information and to make it clear that their territory has this dimension, this spiritual dimension, that there are a lot of sacred sites, is very important. So they want also to map this information as part of their land administration and land governance systems, which makes it a very interesting dialogue with state institutions to introduce this kind of needs of the communities. Thank you, Imke.
Thank you, Maria Clara, and very clear how you showcase the importance of meaningful consultation. So to provide support in giving the right knowledge, but also to listen and understand what they need. Niso, I would like to ask the same question to you. So what strategies can be employed to meaningfully involve marginalized groups in land administration processes? Over to you, Niso.
Merci beaucoup, Imke. Il faut savoir déjà au premier moment que toute administration foncière ou bien toute politique foncière qui n'inclut pas les besoins prioritaires des communautés ou qui ne prend pas en compte les réalités socio-économiques des communautés ne peut être qu'une administration qui sert des intérêts d'un groupe de personnes, d'une minorité, qui, dans la plupart des cas, est enclin à des accaparements des terres ou qui exproprie les bénéficiaires. Ce que nous pensons de cette question sur l'administration foncière, c'est qu'il faudrait faire une analyse participative des besoins et des communautés, les communautés qui doivent être touchées par des réformes foncières surtout, et qui doivent être également impliquées dans l'administration foncière. Au-delà de l'évaluation de leurs besoins, il y a nécessité de les impliquer et de renforcer leurs capacités dans l'élaboration des politiques. Ils doivent être présents lorsqu'on élabore des politiques qui les concernent, parce qu'on ne peut pas élaborer des politiques pour une administration foncière sans impliquer les personnes qui seront touchées par ces politiques. C'est pourquoi il faut renforcer leurs capacités afin qu'ils soient prêts à participer à l'élaboration de la politique. Il faut renforcer leurs capacités afin qu'ils soient en mesure, eux-mêmes en tant que communauté à la base, d'utiliser les approches innovantes et adaptées à la gestion et à l'administration foncière. Il faut nécessairement penser à aller avec les communautés en termes de partenariat et accompagner ces communautés à apporter leur contribution, leur expérience, parce que quoi qu'il arrive, même si l'administration arrive avec son lot d'administration foncière ou de nouveautés, les communautés, pendant plusieurs siècles, ont réussi à avoir une administration foncière sur la base communautaire. C'est pourquoi il faudrait que toute entité qui envisage entreprendre une réforme foncière doit impliquer les communautés locales, surtout les groupes marginalisés, dans la réforme foncière et dans la mise en œuvre des politiques. Merci, Inken.
Sorry, it was hard to find the mute button, but here I am. Thank you very much, Niso, for your intervention. And yeah, you clearly talk about empowering communities to stand up for themselves and to be part of the decision-making processes as well. Then I would like to go to Tommy. In your view, how can we ensure that fit-for-purpose land administration truly serves the needs and priorities of local communities?
Hi, thank you, Imke, and thank you everybody for being at this webinar. I think I want to link up a little bit with what Clara has said, and also based on the introduction to Fit for Purpose from Royal. And she alluded to the sort of top-down approach, and a point that has been contrasted by Maria Clara, and I would like to follow up on that. And she says that local communities should not only be the instruments in the application of technology, but also propose their needs, and that Fit for Purpose should not only serve the needs of the state, but also the needs of the communities with regards to land administration services. And I think this ties in with a broader understanding that if Fit for Purpose land administration is to become a tool for improved land governance, it must continue that attempt to move land administration beyond an accounting of land rights for the purposes of the state, but also to be about the provision of services to communities about land and be in service to the community. So I think we then reach a point where land administration is less a system of accounting, which is of course an important component, but it also becomes a mechanism for providing services to communities about land. And I think this ties into a broader, understanding of the role of the state in making Fit for Purpose work and having sort of deliberate government policy that allows that. So if we want to provide services and use technology and use Fit for Purpose in a way that empowers the rural poor, FFPLA projects must have a perspective that views data and information not only as an output from the system, but as a core input into the system. And I say an input, in other words, whose rights are being recorded, for what purpose are they being recorded, and how that system works. And so that input component from communities is essential to making Fit for Purpose work for everyone. But more than any other approach, I think Fit for Purpose is geared towards making provision for participatory approaches, but that only means that it is a possibility. It is not a guarantee. It is not a sure thing. So fit for purpose makes and opens more than other systems that possibility. But to ensure that this actually becomes the reality, detailed strategies are needed that prioritize local data ownership and accessibility, that prioritizes active participation by the community in the land administration and adjudication processes. And so that we see data and information about land becoming both a foundation for the land administration system input and output, but also becomes a key to ensuring that equitable services and the needed services are provided to communities at local level.
Thank you, Tommy. Thank you for bringing data on board and helping us understanding and navigating through this often very abstract concept. Before we move to the next round, we have a question for Niso. So the fit for purpose land administration is seen as a very top-down approach, but then how can it be done in such a way that it is truly participatory? Are those two conflicting each other, or what is your view?
Oui, effectivement, je pense que la seule façon de gérer le foncier pour qu'il ne génère pas de conflits, c'est de faire en sorte que le foncier soit géré de façon participative. Il y a les propriétaires des terres qui sont d'abord les communautés, les services techniques de l'État qui s'occupent de l'administration des terres. Donc, c'est pourquoi, dans les deux cas, l'administration publique ne peut pas travailler sur le foncier sans une implication, sans une participation active et inclusive surtout des communautés qui sont avant tout les propriétaires des terres. Parce qu'avant qu'il n'y ait l'autorité de l'État, il y a d'abord les communautés qui avaient déjà la possession de ces terres. Mais lorsque l'administration publique s'est installée, il fallait mettre en place un système d'administration foncière. Les deux devraient donc cheminer ensemble, mais dès le moment où nous essayons d'isoler les communautés et nous essayons de mettre en avance l'administration publique pour administrer les terres qui appartiennent à des individus, à des communautés, ça génère des conflits. Donc, il faut nécessairement que nous ayons à l'esprit qu'il faut une participation active et inclusive. Il faut un accès à l'information, mettre l'information à la disposition des communautés qui sont propriétaires avant tout des terres et également renforcer la capacité de ces communautés à pouvoir se défendre, à pouvoir défendre leurs intérêts lorsque leurs terres sont en danger. Il faut surtout disposer des politiques inclusives qui nécessitent la participation des communautés et des politiques qui tiennent compte des types d'activités socio-économiques que mènent les communautés. On ne peut pas surtout lancer une administration foncière au sein d'une communauté sans tenir compte, par exemple, des types d'activités que mènent ces communautés. Est-ce que ce sont des éleveurs? Est-ce que ce sont des agriculteurs? Mais chaque politique foncière ou bien chaque mécanisme d'administration foncière devrait tenir compte des activités socio-économiques et culturelles, pourquoi pas, menées par les communautés autochtones surtout. Merci.
Thank you for responding to the question, Niso. Very clear. Then I would like to go to Royal. The question to you is, what strategies can be employed to meaningfully involve marginalized groups in land administration processes? And before you answer the question, could you maybe then also take into the account the following question from the audience? What is the best way, or from your experience, to disseminate information to communities? Thank you. Over to you.
All right. No, thank you, MK. Before I get into the answer, and then also just reflecting on Niso's answer as well, I just want to emphasize that when we are saying a top-down approach, we don't mean that a government institution would have to implement what they want for the community. It has to be a partnership approach. I think one of the essential elements of fit for purpose land administration is the creation of partnerships and developing of capacity. So it has to be both the top and the bottom working together in order to achieve security of tenure for all. So participation is possible. And as Niso also mentioned, having a needs assessment, understanding what is it that the community wants and desires, in terms of how they want to see their land rights secured will be very essential. In answering your question in terms of the best approach to disseminate information to communities, I would like to reflect back on how we are doing it here in Namibia. I think that one of the best approaches is to start working with institutions or civil society organizations that are already having these links within the communities. So they are most of the time the best ones because they know what are the best methods that needs to be used to disseminate information. And the second one is also to start creating better relationships between the government and in communities. Sometimes governments are viewed from a distance and communities from a distance as well. We need to bring communities and government closer together. In answering specifically your question in terms of what strategies can be employed to meaningfully involve marginalized groups, firstly, I would emphasize this over and over again. Capacity development is important. As Maria Clara already also mentioned, communities know and understand what it is that they need, right? Communities know how their land rights can be secured. So when you are implementing a new approach, it is important that you train and capacitate the communities so that they can also contribute meaningfully. And the second one, which is also very important, I mean, everything is important, but this one is very, very important. There needs to be enabling and inclusive policies for participation. It needs to be prescribed in legislation that communities are supposed to be involved within this land administration process. And that prescription within the law should also be followed up by monitoring and evaluation, ensuring that government agencies are actually doing what they say they're doing in terms of including communities in recognizing and securing of land rights. Thank you, MK.
Thank you, Royal. And thank you for clarifying the top-down approach and somehow to frame it as a partnership approach. That's what's really needed. And yes, everything is important. And talking about importance, Niso, I'll get back to you because one very important issue for Oxfam, at least, is gender equality. Could you, from your experience, share how gender equality and social inclusion are integrated in appropriate land administration?
Oui, merci beaucoup une fois de plus, Imke, pour la question. Nous sommes dans un processus au Tchad, dans un processus d'élaboration d'une politique foncière. Et si je n'abuse pas, je pense que c'est la seule politique qui a connu la participation aussi massive de la société civile et de toutes les autres couches. Et nous pensons également que la participation de toutes les couches dans l'élaboration d'une politique publique devrait être une obligation. Cela devrait permettre à chaque entité de se sentir impliquée ou de se sentir reconnue selon sa participation, selon sa catégorie en tant qu'humain, à être impliqué dans l'élaboration d'une politique. D'abord, nous pensons qu'il faut faire un diagnostic, faire une analyse du genre et de l'inclusion sociale. Comment est-ce que cette analyse du genre et de l'inclusion sociale peut permettre à une politique ou à une administration foncière de ne pas tomber dans la marginalisation ou dans le rejet de certaines personnes concernant leurs droits? Il faut nécessairement également, ce que nous pensons, il y a surtout l'obligation pour les cadres juridiques et politiques de tenir compte des analyses de genre et de l'inclusion sociale. Il faut nécessairement que chaque institution qui voudrait mettre en place une administration foncière de tenir compte de l'analyse de genre et de l'inclusion sociale. Est-ce que nous avons tenu compte de la participation des femmes, des jeunes, des personnes ayant des mobilités réduites? Est-ce que les peuples autochtones ont été consultés? Bref, toutes les personnes qui sont plus ou moins impliquées dans le genre doivent être consultées. Non seulement consultés, mais leurs points de vue doivent être pris en compte pour pouvoir enrichir le contenu d'une politique foncière et mettre en place un mécanisme d'administration foncière. Et ces personnes-là qui doivent être impliquées Mais au préalable, après avoir évalué leurs besoins, après avoir fait une analyse de genre et de l'inclusion sociale, il faut renforcer leurs capacités en matière d'influence et de plaidoyer pour que ces personnes soient elles-mêmes dans la capacité de défendre leurs intérêts et d'apporter une contribution lorsqu'on met en place une politique publique. Parce qu'il ne suffit pas de mener une étude sur le genre et l'inclusion sociale et demander à ces personnes de participer alors que ces personnes ne sont pas assez outillées pour apporter leur contribution dans l'élaboration d'une politique publique. Donc, il faut nécessairement renforcer leurs capacités et les appuyer sur toutes les questions de plaidoyer et d'influence pour qu'eux, à leur tour, s'approprient le mécanisme qui est lancé et qu'ils influencent le processus d'élaboration de la politique ou du mécanisme d'administration foncière qui est lancé. Et surtout, s'occuper également de la sensibilisation et de l'éducation de toutes ces couches-là. Merci.
Thank you, Niso. Thank you for sharing your experience. And I think you make a very valid point that we should not generalize at all. And also, often in these contexts, we talk about women in general, but also there are like so many different layers, so many different needs. So it's very important to carry out these assessments and also not generalize a group. Another very important topic, Maria Clara, over to you, is about environmental management. So how important is fit-for-purpose land administration for environmental management?
Well, I think that environmental management and the environmental issues are very important. And whatever we do, we always have to take them into account. I think more and more it's clear that climate change is very important and that we cannot think about land administration and land governance without taking into account something that we call in the Colombian institution the ecological function of land ownership. So there is an ecological function that you have to assure, even if you have the right on the land, you have to assure that you also have a good environmental management. There's something very interesting. We have been working with collective properties and in Colombia, but I think it's something that has been proven for the whole world. Collective property is like an assurance for good land management, for good environmental management. We can see land cover. The most important areas with land cover are those areas that are managed by indigenous communities and, well, in Colombia also by the Afro-Colombian communities. That means that they have a system that really works good with the environment. They maintain biodiversity, they maintain, and that's because of their use systems also. And to map and to collect data about how they are using the land by themselves, how they use this land is very important to bring into discussions. We have seen in the context we have been working that there are a lot of conflicts between indigenous people or Afro-Colombian people and their neighbors, and mostly these are conflicts about access to resources, there are conflicts around illegal mining, illegal timber extraction, illegal contamination of watersheds. So bringing in all this information into dialogue, local dialogue, has been very important to construct like a land governance system in which people can come to agreements, and environmental issues are common issues, common preoccupations, common worries in which it is possible to get at local solutions based on this information, which is so important. I think really we have to find more and more ways in which to involve these environmental issues into land administration also. I don't know if I've answered your question.
Thank you, Maria Clara. Yes, you did. And I think one of the key factors in facilitating this is the role of data. And Tommy, you are a data advocate. Could you share your experience on what are the barriers for accessing land data and information, also how these could be overcome. And the third question to add into the mix is, who owns the data? That's a question from the audience. Thank you, Tommy.
Thank you very much. And maybe just very quickly to express my appreciation for making this link between these sort of environmental issues and the role of land administration and land administration information as a sort of baseline for addressing environmental issues. So I just want to emphasize that it's an important point. Imke, this is a big ask, but I want to separate out issues that are outside, or at least in my humble opinion, a little bit outside of the scope of FFPLA, and those that within the scope that one can address. So the issues that are sort of bigger and broader are general issues such as access to technology, Wi-Fi penetration in countries and in rural areas, broadly information and communication access technologies, internet connectivity, digital literacy. So these are national and global issues that we need to address, but that are often not within the scope of a fit-for-purpose land administration project. Not to say that they're not important or they must not be considered, but I think it's worth giving that kind of separation of the issues. Then within the FFPLA, even there, sometimes technology can be a bit of a red herring, because it really depends on the purpose for which the technology is employed and the barriers that we see there. So if you look at the founding documents for Fit for Purpose, it says that closed data, closed information, closed dialogue are barriers to implementing FFPLA. So simply put, a lack of transparency. There's a lot in the way of tools that enable openness, but how do we choose to employ these tools? That is a conscious decision that we need to make. So one of the way of, I guess, then also overcoming the barrier is to make data more open. Offer government data in more useful formats that is machine readable, that is downloadable, that is timely, that makes it interoperable and reusable. Also, preemptively and proactively release information, publish information. And I'm not talking about data, and I'm talking about information. This could be information on government activities, on development budgets, on spending priorities, on tracking land data applications, and how these processes are managed, because that opens the gate to dialogue and gives citizens a stronger say in government policies and priorities, and further reinforces this positive engagement. And another barrier is the lack of using defined standards. And I would argue the FFPLA can also take the lead there in advocating for common standards. I saw in the chat somebody mentioned LADM. So using these sort of consistent frameworks and standards is a way of overcoming these barriers of data that cannot speak to each other. I think another barrier is the lack of local knowledge in mapping processes, because that reduces the likelihood of acknowledging local land rights on land. So when we use our tablets and GIS software that is open and open source, it relies on using and engaging the communities. I think there's examples from the Shack Dwellers Federation of Namibia and the Community Land Information Program, because the data itself can become an instrument that shifts political power or entrenches political power. And so when we think of communities, we can talk about making things more equitable or entrenching existing inequities. And then the last point I want to make is a lack of data rights and a lack of data privacy protections. These are both technical and legal issues that we can deal with, because open data is not without limits. So I think when we start thinking about protecting sensitive information, but we think about publishing that which is necessary, we are aware of conflict and sensitive contexts that local realities exist in. And that should drive kind of the data policy rather than sort of an overarching narrative, but really connect to those local realities so that you have a land administration system that is responsive. Thank you.
Thank you, Tommy. So As we already discussed also before, data can become its own reality depending on who's using what data and for what purpose. So there's a lot of strength and empowerment, but as you said, it can also create more inequality, so to say.
Sorry, Imke, you also asked the last question about, you know, whose data and for what, and maybe if I can just have 30 seconds.
Please do.
I think this is why I try to emphasize that kind of local participation and local reality, because that question cannot be answered without involving the people that we are talking about. So I cannot say, you know, what should be the purpose of the data other than in the broadest context to provide land administration services. But local people, when they're involved in those conversations, can then engage in the conversation about what the data can be used for, should be used for, to enable what service. And I think when we have time at the end, I would like to talk about the experience in Namibia with the Shack Dwellers Federation and the Community Land Information Program, because I think it's a good illustration of how data can shift the narrative of the conversation.
Thank you, Tommy. I think we should reserve some time at the end for this example. And people in the chat are also referring to political will. So you mention often we can do this and we could do that, but could you maybe share something on your opinion about political will? How can it help with fit for purpose land administration and data, or what are the barriers, you would say?
Well, I said earlier that fit for purpose land administration provides you a shell for doing something, but it is not a guarantee of that outcome. And so when we think about data from or fit for purpose, there's some technical things that can be done, but those things need to be enabled in law. And in law, we need to be able to say land governance is fundamentally about a democratic contestation of rights between the state and civil society, the public. And so you need to have a land administration system where the state is willing to allow that contestation to take place so that people can react to the data and say, no, this land being registered as state land or as whatever the category may be does not resonate with us. So you must build a system, and that depends, of course, on the sort of political scenario, creating the space for that dialogue, for that ability to say, no, this data contradicts our local knowledge, and have mechanisms with which to deal that. If the purpose of a land administration system is to justify pre-existing power dynamics, pre-existing land relationships, pre-existing inequities, then it does not change the underlying reality on the ground. So from that perspective, I think political will, while it's not the only driver, and there are other ways of generating political will or contesting political will, but in the broadest sense, it is needed, and it needs to be a fundamental part of these type of projects, whether they're at national level or whether they're at local level.
Thank you, Tommy. Royal, I would like to go to you on the same topic. So on the one hand, what are the barriers to accessing land data and information? How could these be overcome? But also the role of political will in getting this data. And there, maybe you can also address one of the questions of the audience, namely, and talking about data, what data will be registered? Because there might be communities who want to register community land. There might be individuals who want to register individual land. So what does fit for purpose do, and what data will be generated? Thank you.
All right. Thank you, MK. I think the conversation is getting more interesting by the minute. I think one of the things that we should also realize when we're asking about what data, what should be registered, and who will be part of the process, we should look at the part of fit for purpose land administration that focuses on purpose. So whatever data is going to be collected is based on the purpose that is decided between the communities and the government. So if the purpose is to protect the environment, that will be the type of data that would inform that purpose. If the purpose is basically to secure tenure for all, recognizing the rights of women, children, vulnerable people, people living with disabilities, pensioners, for example, as well, then that will be the data that will be collected to inform that land registry or that land recordation process. So what we also should realize with fit for purpose land administration is that this is not what we say, what we do in Namibia is what can be done in Chad. What can be done in Chad should be done in Malawi or should be done in Colombia. No, this is about countries and communities defining what their purpose is. Getting back to your question in terms of what are some of the barriers with regard to accessing land data? And I will be speaking from my own experience and also some of the experiences that I've identified within literature. So what we see is that there are three main barriers to accessing land data, mainly technological challenges, political challenges, and then also just some systematic issues that are there because of how systems have been designed and developed. So the first one, navigating governmental processes is quite a challenge. When you need to get approval to access data, it can take weeks sometimes, especially within the Namibian context. When you want to access data, let's say from the Ministry of Agriculture, Water and Land Reform on communal land parcels that are communal land rights, you need to write a letter to the executive director. That executive director needs to give it to the director that is responsible for that division before it gets to the person that actually works with the data. So these procedures are quite lengthy at times, and they're also confusing. So it sometimes makes it very difficult to access data in time. And then the second one, sometimes the data is not centralized. The data is decentralized. One specific example that I have is we were doing a research project on understanding community agricultural projects in Namibia. Instead of getting the data directly from the central government, we were directed to go to the regions in order to access the data. But then when we get to a regional level request, that request was sent back so that we can get permission from the national directorate for the region to release that data. So this makes it very, very difficult. And then in instances where you have, for example, in Namibia, we have the National Spatial Data Infrastructure, where it's supposed to be a harmonization of all different types of land-related data available in one place. You can look it up online. This data is always not up to date. So that also is another challenge. When there is access, the data is always not, at times, not up to date. And then there's also the technological gaps that may exist. As much as there's advancements in some parts of the world, in other parts, there's also limitation of internet coverage and also access to internet. In urban areas, it can be a cost issue, and then in rural areas, it can just be the availability of networks. So this also makes it very difficult to access land data. And then I think lastly, the other barrier that is also connected to some of the other aspects that Tommy was referring to is the lack of clear policies and around access to information and land data. So there's always this confusion around what is data privacy, what is data security. Because of this confusion and a lack of clear policies, it sometimes limits government agencies or creates hesitations from government agencies from sharing land data. And this has, in a way, also leads to a delay in finishing projects. It can also delay planning. And at times, sometimes it actually has an impact on the cost of projects, because instead of you accessing data that is already available, you end up collecting the data again and spending a lot of money on that. Clara, that's what I had to share regarding some of the barriers to accessing land data. I meant MK, thank you.
Yes, thank you, Royal. Thank you also for reminding us that we're not only talking about whose purpose, but also what purpose. That's also very important in this approach. I would like to go back to Niso. So Niso, we've heard already a lot about the obstacles on accessing land data and information. From your experience, how can they be overcome? And in addition, a question from the audience on how can data shape policies that truly serve the needs of communities? I'm sure you can share something from your experience on that.
Merci beaucoup, Imke. Pour parler de l'accès aux données, il faut qu'il y ait des données qui existent d'abord. Nous sommes dans un pays qui n'a pas de politique foncière, dans un pays qui n'a pas de code foncier, un pays qui utilise des textes réglementaires des années 1950-1960, des textes qui ne répondent plus aux exigences économiques de l'heure. Les communautés elles-mêmes ne se reconnaissent plus en ces textes. Donc, je voudrais d'abord qu'on essaie de positionner. Les autres panélistes ont parlé de l'accès aux données parce que, sans doute, dans leur pays, il y a déjà un système de collecte des données qui est en place et c'est peut-être l'accès qui pose problème. Mais chez nous, pour avoir accès à des données, il faut que ces données existent. Nous avons un sérieux problème d'abord dans la collecte des données parce que ces données n'existent pas. Les quelques données rares qui existent au sein du ministère de l'aménagement du territoire sont des données collectées avec des techniques rudimentaires euh, qui absolument n'ont rien à voir avec la technologie. Et l'une des difficultés aussi que nous rencontrons dans notre pays ici et dans le processus que nous avons en cours, c'est qu'il y a un manque de coordination dans la collecte des données et dans la gestion même des données liées au foncier. Et ce manque de coordination fait en sorte que toutes les personnes qui ont, ont besoin d'avoir accès aux données sont obligées de dépenser énormément d'argent. Donc, il y a le problème lié au coût. Il y a également le problème lié à la complexité des procédures et à la lenteur administrative. Donc, tous ces éléments réunis font que ça soit des institutions de recherche, que ce soit des organisations ou des organisations internationales ou des associations qui veulent avoir accès aux données, et même les communautés qui veulent avoir accès aux données n'existent pas. Sur 1 284 000 km², je n'ai pas la certitude du nombre d'hectares que nous avons déjà cartographiés, mais le pays n'est presque pas cartographié. Donc, il n'existe presque pas. S'il faut se positionner à l'échelle des autres pays, nous n'avons pas assez de données disponibles auxquelles il faut accéder. Nos étudiants, par exemple, qui font de la recherche sur le domaine foncier, sont obligés parfois d'aller sur le terrain collecter eux-mêmes des données qui ne sont parfois pas certifiées. Donc, c'est des problèmes tellement compliqués et des problèmes profonds que nous ne pouvons pas résoudre en une année ou en 10 ans, même pas. Parce que non seulement l'accès à la technologie pose problème, il y a un coût lié à la collecte des données sur le foncier et il y a également les questions de corruption qui gangrènent tous les circuits liés au processus de collecte de données ou d'informatisation du foncier. Donc voilà un peu la question que je pourrais répondre en premier. Vous avez dit qu'il y avait un deuxième volet de la question. Vous pouvez me le rappeler, s'il vous plaît, Imke?
Yes, thank you, Niso. So I hear that there's a lack of data. That's the first problem. And my question was also to refer back to the audience in how do communities receive land registration programs or projects, for example. So from individual titling versus community titling, do communities, are they, for example, afraid that they might lose their tribal relations or the communal sense? That's what is your experience? Because you're really starting with getting tenure security for local communities or individuals.
Oui. Déjà, en milieu rural, les communautés n'essayent même pas parce que le coût est tellement élevé et ça leur prend beaucoup de temps de sécuriser leurs terres. Les communautés n'essaient pas de sécuriser leurs terres. Lorsque nous parlons de sécurisation, c'est jusqu'à l'obtention du titre foncier. Mais au niveau communautaire, il y a déjà un mécanisme communautaire qui permet de gérer les terres. Les communautés, entre elles, savent que à partir de telle limite à telle portion de terre, ça appartient à telle personne. Ils essayent, dans la mesure du possible, au niveau communautaire, de trouver des mécanismes pour gérer leurs conflits. Mais si on leur demande de sécuriser leurs terres en essayant d'obtenir un titre foncier, là, tout de suite, les communautés n'essaient même pas parce que le coût est tellement élevé, ça prend beaucoup de temps et il y a un risque qu'à un certain moment, le gouvernement te dise que ce n'est pas ta terre, c'est une terre qui appartient à l'État. Donc, je voudrais également prendre un peu parti de ce que les autres panélistes ont dit, l'utilisation des données numériques ou de la technologie, qui sans doute pourrait simplifier les procédures si jamais les communautés pouvaient avoir accès à la technologie Nous sommes convaincus que cela pourrait simplifier les procédures et réduire même les coûts de collecte des données sur le foncier et d'avoir même accès à ces informations-là. Ça pourrait sans doute également améliorer la coordination de toute la collecte des données sur le foncier. Et également, si nous utilisons la technologie, à notre ère, nous savons que la mise à jour des activités pourrait être facile et quelle que soit la disponibilité ou bien la localisation d'une personne, la personne peut avoir accès à ces données à travers la technologie, à travers Internet, à travers un système de technologie adapté à leur réalité qu'on pourrait mettre en place. Mais lorsque tous ces éléments manquent, il y a une difficulté pour les communautés de sécuriser leurs terres et d'avoir accès à l'information sur le foncier. Merci.
Thank you, Niso. Thank you for sharing the many challenges that you are facing in Chad. You already bridged two technologies. And Tommy, could you maybe share, also listening to Niso, how can technology be leveraged to improve data accessibility and sustainability and usability?
Well, I was listening to Niso, and I was thinking about how much data surrounds us at the moment. So I think we can map the world easily. The technology is not the problem from that regard. It's that we cannot assign the rights, manage the development, and fairly allocate those resources accurately. So if you look at cloud services, tablet computing, cell phone technology, satellite internet, Google Earth, and the world is mapped, and anybody in the world can access more information that they can use. We can easily scan hand-drawn maps and vectorize them. It only tells us and gives us a picture of the Earth. It doesn't assign the rights. We don't know who is the owner or the renter or the occupier of that parcel. And I think that's where the challenge comes in when it comes to sort of equity, but also when we think of technology. I think the technology to collect the data is there, and often the data has been collected. It's the designation of who is the beneficiary, who has the right to use. That becomes difficult because you can't see that from Google Earth. You can see the building, you can see it's a field, but you don't know who is the owner. You don't know who is legally entitled to receive the benefits from that. And that's really, I think, where we have a problem. And that brings in this question, I think at one point you asked Imke, for whose benefit and for what purpose? So when we do this mapping, and there's a lot of private initiatives that are mapping, there's global organizations that are mapping the world as we speak, and it's been done and it's ongoing and in more detail. But how can we make that work for society in a way that is more equitable? Because the inequity is what we are trying to address when it comes to land registration and tenure and fit for purpose. And here I think we have to get better at national level. Countries have to get better to link up with and leverage continental initiatives. You know, Africa has a digital transformation strategy for Africa 2020 to 2030, and kind of try and situate these initiatives within, I think, broader national and continental frameworks. Because the African Union already, we talked about political will. The African Union provides that legal legitimacy coming from the continental level, and many of the countries have signed up. So their heads of states are in some sense committed. And so that is a strategy for leveraging and getting that political will and buy-in. At the same time, there are also continental strategies for legal initiatives about ensuring more equity when it comes to land. So I think to overcome the sort of technological resistance in some ways, the barriers to information, it's about moving to making sure that information and the way it is used actually makes people's lives better, provides improvements on the ground. It's not just about theoretically, this is what can be done. The question is actually, does that bring water to my house? Does it provide sanitation services? Does that secure my rights? Does it mean I won't be relocated or disenfranchised or moved off my land or persecuted? And I think we need to get better at making those links. And so when it comes to sort of improve the accessibility of data and the usability of data. I think we need to get much more regular in conducting data audits, data feedback loops, where we see data as really a core part of these processes and develop feedback mechanisms where the communities can object, can raise. And it brings me back to my earlier point about this democratic contestation of rights. That means we need to have a land administration system that is willing to accept changes in the land record in order to improve the scenario rather than striving for perfection from the beginning. And I think Royal mentioned at one point, she said, the purpose part, the fit for purpose. You need to consider where country is, where that community is, and how you can best deliver on these promises that are promises from the fit for purpose.
Thank you, Tommy. Thank you. It's very clear. So maybe Maria, you could share from your experience in Colombia working with the communities. How can technology be leveraged to improve data accessibility and usability?
Well, a lot of things have been said already, but I think it's very important to assure that your technology is really accessible, simple, easy to use in difficult situations. Many times rural areas are difficult to access, so having cell phone applications, having to collect data, simple ways in which everybody, even if you're not literate, you can use those systems. And then I think also that there has to be worked on having a very available web portals where the information can be available. So these are things that we have seen. We have seen, for instance, in the same example I brought in at the beginning about the indigenous people from the Sierra Nevada, who had made already their own handmade maps, very detailed, beautiful maps with a lot of information where all those plots that they want to have as part of a collective land title are documented, but in a way in which it is not usable by the state institutions. So using this cell phone application and making maps that look more technological and are connected in a language, in a technological language that can be used by the state or institutions, it's helped to accelerate the process a bit. So I think it can be used as a translation, but I think that there are a lot of things, and we have been talking a lot about technology, state and local communities, but there are also issues that are involving international contexts and international uses of technology that are imposed also to the countries and to the communities. We have been like suffering a bit the carbon credit issue in Colombia. They have all these private companies that have been contacting local communities that have these collective lands, which are very attractive because they have a good land cover and a lot of biomass to sell in this carbon credit market. And there is no information, there's no regulation, there's no regulation at international level, there's no regulation at national level. And then there is this idea of that you need a lot of very specialized technology to prove land coverage, etc., so that people themselves cannot generate this information about carbon and how carbon is captured in their territory. So it's very abstract. It's in a language that makes it very difficult. So you need these regulations. You need access to the information. We even don't have a clear information what kind of agreements are established between all these private companies and local communities. It's not clear for the state itself, for the government, what's going on. So generating a lot of information and creating these web portals about this information. And then I think we have also to think that it's not only a state and the community, but this international context that's also important for data information management.
Thank you, Maria Clara. And one follow-up question. How do you support the communities when they feel that they are imposed all these technologies and that they have to fit into that mechanism, so to say? What do you do with them, or how do you support them?
Now, for instance, in this carbon credit issue, the importance is that has been to that they understand what it is about, what kind of information is collected, how we can translate it in a simple way, so that they can understand what the issues are. I think that's one of the important things. So we go back to capacity building, information, accessible information for the people in a language they can understand and in which they can do. And then there is a lot of because of this situation has given a lot of internal governance problems, conflicts among leaders, conflicts between communities. So talking and helping them to think about what kind of governance they need to be able to affront, to assume this kind of new issues that are coming to them. Mm-hmm. And they're so related to land governance. Mm.
Thank you, Maria Clara. Royal, I would like to get back to you. Lots have been said already. Could you share your experience from Namibia on working with local communities, data accessibility and usability?
Okay, thank you, MK. On data accessibility and usability, one of the case studies, I think, which is also one of the best in the world, is the case of the Shack Dwellers Federation of Namibia. It is an affiliate of Slum Dwellers International. They have been working for the past 30 years in collecting data in informal settlements, understanding what is the land tenure arrangement in the informal settlements, what is the availability of services within the settlements, and what are some of the environmental concerns that they have. So once they collect this data as communities, they take the data and they present it to the local authority. But one thing that I have to emphasize is that before the community takes the data and present it to the local authority, they present it to themselves, and then they have a dialogue and understand that, what are the development priorities that we have in this area, and how can we contribute towards, improving our own community and not necessarily just relying on government action. So once there's an agreement on community level, the data is presented to the local authority, and the negotiation process starts happening. We have had successful case studies, one in Kobabas, which is in the regional capital of the Maheke region here in Namibia, where we have seen a community of about 2,000 households. For some countries, it might be small, but for Namibian context, it's quite big. Managed to avoid land evictions and resettlement, and maintained their rights within that informal settlement. We had assistance from the Global Land Tool Network in piloting the social tenure domain model, where communities were trained on collecting the data themselves, capturing this data, and then also presenting and analyzing this data. And what we have seen is right now we have communities constructing their own houses. They have security of tenure, where later on, with the efforts that the communities have made and the recognition from the local authority, we had national government come in and say, recognize them and provide access to formal land rights, where they have now security of tenure through the implementation of the flexible land tenure system. And we are moving on with what we are learning from one small case study. We have another town where we are currently piloting our tenure responsive land use planning, where local authorities should plan in order to respond to the tenure or the insecurity of tenure of communities. So this has all come from communities deciding that they need to show the local authority and government in general that they have challenges, and they presented these challenges with data. They presented the affordability levels in the community. They presented income levels as well, and also what their development priorities are. It was not just a matter of demonstrating that they have a challenge. They also demonstrated that they have capacity. They are able to contribute. And we have had quite a lot of support as well from some international development partners that provided funding. We had professional land surveyors that came up and provided assistance in boundary measuring. So this was all efforts from the community level, and government came on board and provided additional support as well. And I think this can be scaled up on a national level, and I think countries can also take this example and see how they can apply it. But it all required all the different partners to come together and address the needs of the community.
Thank you, Royal. Thank you for sharing these inspirations. And I think all documentation around these case studies that people can learn from, it would be great to have the links so that people can also look it up after this webinar and get inspired and learn. What I would like to also link this to Tommy, because you are an open data advocate, but of course all these documents and all these learnings, they are all displayed also on the land portal, and that's also a big data platform where people can go to. So I would just encourage you to do so. But then, Tommy, going back to more the local level, so to say, what role can civil society organizations play in advocating for open and accessible land data?
Okay, very quickly, I think we must recognize that civil society and the relationship to government can occupy sort of different spaces. It can be antagonistic, it can be activist, it can be cooperative, it can be collaborative. And so everybody has to figure out kind of the way that best works. But I think what it comes down to is about articulating a vision and defining how your needs can be met or should be met, what those needs are in a world that I think is increasingly disconnected physically and more connected digitally. And so one of the examples I want to circle back to is the Community Land Information Program in Namibia. And some years ago, when we were working on that, we had a community that essentially comprises about, I think at that time, 140,000 households that were living in informal settlements, and extensive information said about themselves that they're documented. And we were at the university, were kind of a liaison with government. There was a lot of initiatives, a lot of discussions, but what happened every time is that politically government would say, yes, we will support, we will provide services, but when these processes now go to the technocrats in the Department of Urban Development, they work from the data that they have. This data of 140 families in informal settlements does not exist in the formal system. By definition, these people don't exist because the technocrats, the planners that are looking at water connections and new connections for sewer, how much energy will we need next year? That data does not get into the system. It is only when, after many exhaustive meetings taking several years, when that community could present their data to the ministry, could have some sort of grudging acknowledgement that the data exists and that this data becomes part of the formal government planning mechanism, that they can actually start even being catered for. My point that I'm trying to make here is that these 140,000 families existed, but for the planners in paper, remotely in far removed public planning offices, they don't exist. So the data, or the existence of the data, becomes the act of existence for the community, for the people. And so that is just, I make that point to say that often communities and people underestimate the importance and the value of data, because in this digital world that is disconnected, if you don't exist in the computer system, in the software, in the information system, then I am sorry, you don't exist. We've all had that kind of cartoon moment where you are standing in front of a computer, receptionist or desk, and they say, "I'm sorry, sir. According to my system, it says you have died." And you say, "Yeah, well, I'm here." It says, "Doesn't matter. My information in front of me, the system says you don't exist." And I think that's the dilemma. And I think that is what organizations like, the Land Portal, the National Housing Action Group, the Shack Dwellers Federation, that is a thinking that we need to understand, that we need to internalize, that often our very existence is defined by our existence in a database or being accounted for in a database, at least when it comes to sort of the planning services, the provision of land services. It's a terrible thing to say, but it is a reality that I think we need to deal with. So if you ask, what role can we play? It's to think about that, and then think, how do you respond to that predicament or to that challenge as a civil society organization or as a community?
Yes, and while you're talking, Tommy, I mean, I already sense this feeling of like to refrain from this, because like everything is data nowadays, but like we just listened to Niso and there is no data on land for chat. So how do these realities, how do they come together? I think it's a very important discussion to have also, that many people are afraid of all these developments, and which shoe you try to fit in, so to say. Sorry, you wanted to respond to that?
I just wanted to say, I mean, yes, of course, I realize completely it raises sort of a broader, almost existential philosophical question. How can I not exist when I am here? I'm on my land or I'm on my farm. Yet, just because I'm not in somebody else's database, I don't exist. But it does happen. What happens is a multinational corporation signs an agreement with the government, and they will say, this land is a forest reserve. There are no people. They don't exist because they're not in the database. There could be thousands of people living in that area, but your absence from any formal kind of database registry information system really sort of undermines also your physical existence. And this is a huge challenge. This is a huge problem for individuals and organizations that they need to deal with, where your physical reality is becoming less and less relevant to your digital reality.
Yeah, thank you, Tommy. Well, another way to approach that is by proper due diligence processes by companies, but I think we can have a whole other webinar on that topic. Thank you for your intervention. I know that we only have like 10 minutes left, so I would like to go back to Maria Clara. We have heard a lot about land governance issues, and for you, what are the key challenges and opportunities to integrate land governance consideration into fit-for-purpose land administration?
Well, there are so many key things, but I think that there is a key opportunity involving local people. We have just finished a very interesting process of free, prior, informed consent with indigenous communities, peoples of the country, because the country is trained to introduce the multi-purpose cadastre system. And as they have their rights, the right to a free, prior, informed consent to see how they will be involved in this multi-purpose cadastre system. It has been very interesting because this whole process, and then we have to take into account that 1/3 of the country is in hands of indigenous communities who have big indigenous resguardos reserves. So it's important to have their informed consent to manage the information, etc. That's been very important because they designed like a protocol how to manage the data, who is going to collect the data. The communities themselves are made. It has been possible now through this protocol that they are the ones who are becoming cadastral operators for their territories. And being part of the collection of information, but also information that can serve as a basis for their life plans and their land governance plans. So I think it's a very interesting process to see that you, through a political negotiation based on international supported rights, this FPIC right has been very important. So you see that it is a huge opportunity to integrate these land governance considerations. But then to bring it down to earth in concrete situations, I think that's a big challenge. And we have seen that involving, for instance, universities is also is very important. So you need the whole society. For instance, in universities that can inform, that can accompany specific communities in these processes, is very important and very helpful. So I think these two things, that using this formal political instruments, and then also having the voluntary support of other actors, that can be very important to because the situations in Colombia, each region is a whole different constellation of different populations in different situations with different rights, very complex, different languages. Well, so we need a lot of people helping and thinking and supporting local communities.
Thank you, Maria Clara. And your plea on additional support is also very clear, and the context specificity. It's so true. I would like to give the last question first to Royal, and maybe Niso can add, because I think it's an interesting question from the audience. So first, also for you, what are the key challenges and opportunities in integrating land governance consideration into the fit-for-purpose land administration? But then also, how can fit-for-purpose land administration support Africa's transition towards a decolonized land approach? So I hope, Royal, you can take this question.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Thank you, MK. I think one of the things that we have to recognize is that especially when you're looking at the African Agenda, Agenda 2063, there is an approach that is presented in the text that does enable countries to provide and secure tenure for all. And that means that countries should look at changing and amending colonial legislation, in order to meet the needs of their communities. So basically, I would just mention that on that question. Getting back to the question around the opportunities for integrating land governance considerations in fit for purpose, I think they are there. They are integrated. There's a promotion of participation, inclusivity. There's a promotion of transparency within land administration processes and within land administration institutions. And I believe that the opportunities for implementing fit for purpose at scale and securing tenure for all lies in strengthening our collaborations. I was so excited and very happy when Maria Clara mentioned the role of universities. Universities are at the core of the next generation of professionals that are going to support the implementation of fit for purpose land administration. So I think governments should look at including and partnering with with universities. And then I also would like to reflect this on what we have done here at the Namibia University of Science and Technology. We have been working with civil society. We have partnership agreements with national and local government in ensuring that we pilot and test some of these theories that are being presented in literature, and some of the cases that have been done in other countries. We are piloting them actively here in Namibia. And I think when we move to reflecting a bit more on the challenges, I just want to mention that some of the major challenges of fit for purpose land administration lies in our comfort zones as land professionals, where there is this requirement to maintain the status quo of surveying standards or your land valuation standards. So I think we need to move away from this and just embrace the fit for purpose approach a bit more. And while we do emphasize that there is tenure security for all, there is also a lack of investment, at least serious investment in land property or securing of tenure projects. There's not enough investment. I think governments need to start committing a bit more in terms of capital in supporting projects that are looking at securing land rights for all. And finally, maybe to repeat again, in terms of the opportunities, firstly, I would say there is enabling a legislation that promotes the inclusion of communities in recognition of their land rights, at least within the Namibian context. There are institutional frameworks that we can already take advantage of in seeing how do we apply the fit for purpose approach in capturing data and then also in managing land data. And there are so many institutions already that have been set up that have quite a lot of knowledge. I would mention the International Federation of Surveyors, for example. It runs various capacity development projects. There is a young surveyors network that look at capacitating the future land surveying professionals. So I think countries should take advantage of these resources that are available on an international level. I'm also quite excited when I'm hearing, I'm finishing now, when I'm hearing the case of NISO in Chad, that they don't have the data. And I'm like, okay, but we have the experience, we have the knowledge on how to collect that data. We are quite open and available to provide that support. Maybe another country that is French speaking will be available that has some good case studies. So I think we should leverage what is already there and see how we can make improvements. Thank you, Emke.
Thank you, Royal, and thank you for this also kind words and providing a helping hand. So we have only 2 minutes left. So I would like to ask Niso, Maria Clara, and Tommy to have a very short last remark for the audience. Niso.
Merci beaucoup à tous et merci Imke. Pour la dernière question qui a été répondue par Clara, je pense que il y a un problème que nous devrions ajouter, c'est la dissémination de certaines méthodes de collecte de données ou d'administration foncière. Nous aurons beau avoir des textes, des lois pour administrer les terres, mais lorsque nous mettons en place ces textes et lois, il y a un problème d'applicabilité qui pose problème parce que les communautés auprès de qui nous devons administrer ces textes et lois ne connaissent pas les langues dans lesquelles ces textes sont élaborés. Je voulais soulever là la difficulté également qu'on peut rencontrer dans l'administration foncière et la mise en place des mécanismes d'administration foncière, que ce soit en arabe ou en français chez nous ici. Les communautés peuvent parler ces langues, mais ne pas pouvoir lire ou écrire ces langues-là. Donc, les langues de production des lois et de dissémination peuvent poser problème dans l'administration foncière. Et aussi, du côté de la société civile, il faut reconnaître que dans notre pays surtout, il n'y avait pas, avant que nous ne lancions la politique foncière, un intérêt accordé particulièrement à la question foncière, mais nous avons pu propulser la société civile et leur montrer cet intérêt de s'attacher à la question foncière. Et la politique foncière en cours au Tchad ici est une politique foncière portée par la société civile. On a pu réveiller en eux cet engouement, cette envie de militer pour le foncier. Et aujourd'hui, ils sont en train de faire le travail. Nous pensons qu'avec leur implication, ça va beaucoup aller plus vite parce qu'ils sont en mesure de mener ce plaidoyer et de s'engager pour la transparence. Merci.
Thank you. Thank you, Niso. That's a very great example, and I think it should be shared with the audience as well, as you have recorded this and written it up. Maria Clara, a final word.
I lost my time, my 1 minute, my 1 second. No, I think there is something that's very important, which is symbolic, and the power of symbolic actions are so important in our context. I think many of the countries we are talking have a colonial past and a colonial and need to decolonize, still need to decolonize. And there is one thing which I think we have to put effort on it, and that is that we make maps and we include information with the local names of the sites of the country itself. So we have like a very Spanish names for everything, while people have their own names, their own. And I think this is something which they can do, and they would like to do, they want to do, they want to show that they have this knowledge, this way of connecting to the land as an empowering instrument. So I think this is something that should be part of land administration efforts, information efforts.
Thank you, Maria Clara. Very clear, practical point, and I think that should be taken on board. Last, Tommy.
Thank you very much. I'll be very quick. Two things I want to say. One, we need to stop. I'm not saying we all think of it that way, but fit for purpose is really not a project. It's a land administration system. It's an approach to land administration and land governance. And I think that's an important point to take away from here. And then my second point, and this was posted by, I think, Pamela Duran in the chat at some point. She asked a question about decolonization. And I think we can also see how decolonization as a political tool or as a political project can use fit for purpose to have some honest conversations about how land is governed, by whom, for whose benefit, and for what purpose. Because I see democratic land governance as a very natural contestation of the landless and rural poor and the state and government actors and this is going to go back and forth.
Yes. Thank you, Tommy. Thank you to all the panelists for your final words. And please take the survey that has been shared by Neil, and more will come. So please just watch out for Land Portal, for the recording, and for the key takeaways. Thank you all. A big applause.
Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, MK. Bye, everyone.